Okay, you are in broadcast now. Okay?
Thank you very much, Secretariat. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tiziano Pignatelli from the Italian National Agency for New Technology, Energy and Economic Sustainable Development in Italy. I had the pleasure to chair the session number 17, Greenhouse Gases Reduction and Technological Progress. In order to save time, I would like to give quickly the floor to the first speaker, who is Mr. Banning, Maximilian Banning. I will introduce him very briefly. He is working for a company named GWS, which is an Institute for Economic Structures Research, and he's an economist, and his action is focused on modeling studies on renewable energy and related socio-economic efforts. So, Mr. Banning, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I hope you all can hear me well and see the slides on full screen now. Welcome also from my side. I'll be giving a presentation today on the impact that an accelerated path towards green technologies, so the installation or usage of green technology, might have on individual economies. Everything presented here is a collaborative effort from my colleagues from GWS and myself. The project I'm presenting was funded by the German Ministry of Economic Affairs, and we have another project partner you might see on the upper right side on the slides, a partner institute, ICES. As you might have heard on many presentations, I think in this conference, there have been much discussed the efforts that are needed by both countries as well as companies that are required to meet the climate ambitions, and especially the aims to reach net zero in the foreseeable future. So what have been often discussed are the costs associated with it, but you can of course look at it from another perspective, and that is that there are not only costs implied, but those investments necessary might of course yield benefits to the firms, companies, or countries that are able to actually provide those goods necessary for the transition. If you focus on the right side, for example, on the slides, you can see projections by the International Energy Agency that project the market growth of certain energy technologies, in this case, a selected set of clean energy technologies, where you can see that under ambitious paths, so NZE is of course the net zero emission scenario that they calculated. You can see that already by 2030 the market size of those technologies is multiple times that of today's market. Then of course the question is, if there is such a large market volume, who is actually able to benefit and is able to supply the goods? There's one issue in particular we are focusing on in this 3-year project, and this is the issue of low carbon leakage. I think carbon leakage is something that is pretty common knowledge of today, and all of you might be familiar with it. There have been many presentations also already on this conference about it. The focus here is now on low carbon. So the stress really is on low carbon leakage and not to mitigate carbon leakage. What is meant by that is that we are not looking at what is usually done, emission intensive firms, companies or technologies that are of the risk of leaving a country when regulation gets too strong. But on the other hand, we are looking at those providers of clean energy technologies that might leave a country if a policy environment elsewhere might be more beneficial, and that the developed economies are running the risk of losing their top technology, so to speak. if this is a risk for developed economies or the up until now top providers of those, is something we want to find out. And this is, of course, for Germany of interest, especially. In this context, there have been often been discussed the pros and cons of first mover strategy. Lead markets is something that is often analyzed in this aspect. If we want to find out if this risk is actually real, we have, of course, to analyze and to find out where the new goods that are now required are actually being produced. We want to model that, and to actually be able to do that, we need to have a deep understanding of the value chains that are involved. That refers to both the sectors that are actually providing the goods and the intermediate products required for that. But on the other hand, of course, the countries, so the origin, the regional origin of the goods is also of high importance to us. When we are able to actually do this, we are then interested in the socio-economic impacts that the production in certain parts of the world might have. So in the first step, we are looking at the monetary variables associated with it, but then yeah, we are also looking at jobs, for example, that are then created. On the right-hand side, you can see the overview of the technologies we are interested in. So there are many that are linked to the generation of clean energy, but there are some that yeah, might be broader, so to speak. So for example, efficiency in industry or building technologies summarize a lot of different technologies, and there are some where the purpose is multifold, such as batteries. What makes everything even more complicated is that those technologies on the right-hand side are often not easily found in commonly used statistics. So this might be for the reason that the statistics we are using are not as disaggregated as we want them to be. It might be the case that for yeah, especially international data, older classifications are used where technology of interest to us is not then identified. And it might finally also be the case that the one technology, or more or less the summarization of a technology we are using, actually includes a lot of different products. Again, if we are looking at building technologies, for example, there's not one single good, for example, that is found in a good classification that we could analyze, but it's rather a multitude of goods we have to consider. As I already mentioned, we are trying to model those effects, or rather analyze the effects using a model. The model we are using is called GenForce E. The E stresses the importance of the energy module. It's a macroeconometric model, so we are not using a CGE model, but rather use yeah, behavior that was observed in the past and project that into the future using regression analysis. Luckily, we can use detailed data for multiple countries using the OECD database. We are using many other data sources besides that, where I won't go into detail now, maybe just focus on the right-hand side on the diagram, where I just want to stress that what makes this model fitting for this purpose is the combination of the monetary world and the physical world that we are actually able to combine in this model. So on the left-hand side of the diagram, you can see the typical input-output core, so to speak, which is linked to national accounts, and on the other hand, also to bilateral trade. This is for each country itself, of course. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the physical world that is represented in the energy balance, where we have yeah, detailed information on what sector is demanding how much energy, and then we are linking those to emissions that we can also calculate these as well. This has been the state that basically existed before the project was started. What we are trying now is to actually implement those 14 technologies and map them into the existing IO framework. And there, of course, we are running into the first problem that the IO tables only distinguish 36 sectors of production, and those are not as disaggregated as we wanted them to be. So we need to modify the existing coefficients in a way that we can actually account for a higher production and demand of those clean energy technologies. In the ideal case, there are already from other projects or research existing vectors that we can use. In this regard, our project is closely linked, and we are very grateful that we can use or can build on these foundations, on the work of O'Sullivan and Adler, among others, who are actually, or who have published those vectors in the past that can actually link to or can be linked to an actual input-output table. But as we will see, this is so far only easily possible for renewable energy technologies, and those are only a subset of those 14 we want to consider or we would have liked to have considered by the end of the project. But that is, of course, open to research now how we can deal with that. Another challenge we face is that the classifications also in the model might be different. So trade, of course, is of huge importance to us because the goods are not all only produced domestically and then installed in the same country, but there's a lot of trade going on. And of course, with the production decision, we actually want to analyze. This is also mapped in the bilateral trade metrics. The work that has already done or has been done before mainly focused on employment effects, such in the case of O'Sullivan and Adler. So they were able to both calculate direct and indirect employment from installation or an accelerated path to green energy. But this whole model framework has, as we are aware, not been used for such a purpose up until now. So we not only want to calculate employment effects, but also focus on monetary variables that are then linked, of course, to the physical world. What does this actually look like? And I hope we can go through this diagram one by one. On the left-hand side, you basically see what has been also presented in the concept of the model before. So if we are using those carbon price increases as a starting point, the carbon price increase here, of course, is a proxy for various policy measures that for now we are using a stylized form, so to speak, and link everything to a carbon price in a given country. This is the starting point of our analysis. And then if you are going to the right and then follow the basically green path, so to speak, we can see that installations of clean energy technologies are linked to an increase in carbon prices and increase themselves. This is done endogenously now, and this is something we newly implemented as part of this project. The installations of clean energy technology, of course, requires an increase in investment. And if we are then following this path, so to speak, the increase in demand goes into the input-output table, where we then get an increase in production. And of course, this increase in production itself requires more intermediate goods, and thus production in all sectors is increased. This has an impact on the labor market as well as on the global GDP, but not all effects might be as positive as they seem here. For example, not all CET can be produced domestically, and thus imports are required. And there, everything gets interesting in the sense that now we are looking at the international trade structure, and that is one focus point of the project, where we see that, okay, this might be the point where we can actually go into and modify it accordingly, that we now have actually a multitude of different factors that are impacting the trade structure. Up until now, very much has been dependent on relative prices. But if we can, as we can see on the right side, there are many factors that we are now considering now, starting with more standard economic approaches, like, again, production costs, and somehow mapping the competitiveness that is of the technologies themselves, but on the other hand also of comparable technologies, so the competition there. But then
last 5 minutes, Mr. Bunny.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. But then what is now really a new step is that we also want to consider those policy frameworks that might be by indicators such as R&D spendings, or the development of infrastructure. But then on the other hand, infrastructure is of course something that also leads to path dependencies, and all that is something we want to indicate by incorporating that into a trade model. I only want to briefly mention here on the left hand side, you can also see the channel that is provided by the energy module. So the right hand side, there's pretty much a focus on the quantity of things, where you can see a price effect resulting from the linkage to the energy module. Okay, so let me take a glance at first results we already calculated. We are of course doing a lot of scenario analysis, and this is what is also done in this project. Although for now, this is more or less a model comparison rather than a scenario comparison, where we did one run using an unmodified model, and another run of both scenarios presented here using now a modified one, where we are actually incorporating renewable energy technologies into the model, their installation, and the effect that those might cause along their value chains. We can see here that we have a reference scenario that is basically business as usual, and then contrast it with a 2-degree scenario where more effort is required, as you can see in the carbon prices. And on the left diagram, you can see in the original modeling, this has a slightly positive effect. So on the right hand side, or on the right axis, you can see the relative differences. On the left side, both scenario paths. Then on the right diagram, you can see that now with the modified modeling approach, we can see that actually now on the model is more sensitive to this impact, and the effects are about twice as large using a more sensitive modeling. This then is already where I come to a brief outlook and conclusions. So basically, to summarize, what we are focusing on is really this integration of 14 different clean energy technologies in a global model that uses input-output tables as well as bilateral trade matrices. We want to answer the question how shifts in production occur and how trade flows are actually developing. We try to quantify as much as possible, and one discussion where this is closely linked to is, of course, the creation of lead markets So can a country benefit in the long run if it accelerates its process now, is able to, basically found a home industry, so to speak, and compete on the world market. I've talked a lot about the economic side of things and monetary values, but what is of course important, and this is where our project partner comes in, is the socio-technical assessment of things. So they are really taking a close look at the policy regimes and are evaluating how these might impact the demand and thus the production then of things, or of goods, I should say. And we, of course, want to generalize their findings. Let me finish with the overall question we try to answer, and this is, of course, how the different speeds of countries might impact the outcome, and who is actually able to benefit from an accelerated path towards green energy. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions you have, or even better, any suggestions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banning. Thank you, first of all, for being in time, exactly in time with your time allocated. Thank you very much. Let's go quickly, just to remind you that we have questions and answers at the very end of the session in the chat. While I am introducing the second speaker, Mr. Milindi, I ask him, please share the screen and your presentation, please, on the screen. Mr. Chris Milindi is from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. He is currently assistant lecturer at the university, and he is an economist, and his field of application is in energy economics, econometrics, macroeconomics, and financial economics. Now we see the slides, and he will deliver a presentation on impact of technological progress on sectoral carbon emissions. Does it differ across countries' income level? Mr. Milindi, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. How long do I have to, the time? 20 minutes?
20 minutes. Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, so my name is Chris Milindi. I'm from University of Pretoria in South Africa. I'm going to present to you today this article that I'm still working on it, and I want to share with you the results that I got so far. So the article is titled "The Impact of Technological Progress on Sectoral Carbon Emission," and we want to know as well, does that impact differ across country income groups? So the overview of today's presentation will be, I'll be talking about the context, the research problem, and then a bit the literature review, the data and methodology, and then we'll talk about the results. Okay, the context is, of course, world CO2 emission. You can see that the trend, the CO2 emission trend is very concerning. From 2000 to 2018, CO2 emission increased from 23 billion to 34 billion. That's an increase of 48%. And that's, as we all know, it's quite concerning, because if we continue with that trend, we will not be able to reach the Paris Agreement for limiting the temperature to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. So, and the context here is, I'm talking about sectoral carbon emission. So emissions that come in energy sectors, in each energy sectors. And here I took the 5 energy sectors, and as you can see on the diagram there, let me talk about a bit the sample. I'm using a sample of 45 economies, and those 45 countries represent 90% of total GDP in the world, and 88% of global CO2 emissions. So it's quite a data set that is quite representative. And for that data set, if we go and see the emission per sector, we see that the power industry, which is the generation of electricity, which is carbon emission that come from the generation of electricity, has 34% share in total carbon emission. And then comes the transport sector that has 24%, the manufacture sector that has 23%, and then the petrol sector, which is carbon emission that's come from the extraction of petrol, of oil, it's 6%. And then the building sector, carbon emission that's come from the building sector is 13%. So this data comes from Aggregate. Aggregate is it's an organization, not international, an organization founded by the EU, by the European Union, and they gather data on sectoral carbon emission. The solution to climate change, we know what are the solutions. We know that we need renewable energy, we need sustainable transportation, we need to comply to environmental laws, and we need to protect forest and reforestation. But also we need technology. We need technology that can be used as a tool, an important tool to fight against climate change. So the research problem here, what I'm trying to do is, what is the impact of aggregate technology and green technology on carbon emission that comes from different sectors? So most of the time, what in many papers, they've looked at the impact on technology on total carbon emission, but now I wanted to go on a sectoral basis and see emission from the power sector, how technology has an impact on emission from the power sector or the manufacture sector or the petrol sector, just to see how technology can differently impact those emissions. So why is it important to investigate this question? Is the role of technology on climate change crisis has been discussed a lot over the past decade, and for all the reasons that I mentioned above, and since the Industrial Revolution with the invention of the steam engine and all that. And we want to know, we know that the technology definitely played a role, and it's going to play a role again in the future, as it's in our everyday life. So it's also important to look at the climate change problem from different energy sector perspectives. So we want to change a bit the perspective and try to see in different sector how because sometimes it's also it's good to look at the problem at a global view, but it's also interesting to see from each sector and to see what role and how technology interact with carbon emission in different sectors. And the effect of technology may be different in each sector due to differences in the production process or the financial capacity. One can argue, for instance, that the technology may play a bigger role in the power sector than in the building sector, for instance, because in the power sector, most of the time the generation of electricity belongs to the state. It's the government who take that in control, and the government often has it has financial meaning. But though, so that's the differences in financial capacity of different sector we can have the technology playing a different role there. And the vulnerability to the rebound effect. Some sectors are very vulnerable to the rebound effect compared to other sectors. For instance, the manufacture sector, all sectors are actually can be impacted by the rebound effect, but some sector, of course, maybe more than the other. The manufacturing sector, since it's run by companies, they want profits, and they want to produce at a level of energy at a less level of energy. So they want definitely energy efficiency in the production process, but which is not always the case in the power sector, where it's household will get electricity, they don't always take into account the rebound effects and the way to manage all that. So, and the compliance to strict environmental regulation as well. You can see that technology can also play different, because you've seen with, for instance, with France in the COP26, they announced that they want to cut off finances to companies that extract petrol outside their country. They will cut off the finance, but unless these companies use carbon capture storage technology. So you can see that's just that environmental regulation can push forward that technology. So that's why it can be different. And this is a diagram that shows how CO2 emission actually impacts carbon, how aggregate technology impacts carbon emission in total. It's a very simplistic diagram, but actually I believe that it shows the big story. So you can see that aggregate technology, as we have the positive sign means that it increased carbon emission. The green negative sign, it means that it's decreased carbon emission. Aggregate technology can at the same time increase carbon emission and decrease carbon emission. And you can see that it goes down, and we have three big components in aggregate technology. The first component is fossil fuel technology. Those are technologies that can only work with fossil fuel. Example, cars, combustion engine cars. And we have hybrid or neutral technologies. They can at the same time increase or decrease carbon emission. Those are it's the biggest component. And example of this are, like, for instance, the fridge at home, or the devices, the microwave that you have at home. The microwave doesn't, if I can say, the microwave doesn't care if the energy it receives comes from renewable energy or from fossil fuels. So those are neutral, and they depend on the type of energy they are filled, that they are supplied with. And green technology, those technology actually, the green technology, for instance, electric cars or renewable energy, those are green technology that reduce carbon emission definitely. And all these three components are actually, they are affected by energy efficiency. It means that all these technologies are getting better over time. They're getting less energy, they consume less energy. And then they are also subject to the rebound effect. It means that's positive. And you can see that the final impact on carbon emission, it's actually the balancing of all these components and the outside effects. So the literature review, you can see that there are many papers that have talked about sectoral carbon emission. Not many, very few papers that have talked about sectoral carbon emission. And most of them have found that carbon emission does not have a significant impact. Technology does not have a significant impact on sectoral carbon emission. So the contribution of this study, I've talked that a bit earlier. So I'm going to analyze the relationship between carbon emission and aggregate and green technology in more than one sector. When I talk about aggregate technology here, I'm constructing an index of aggregate technology, and I will show how. And green technology will be represented by renewable energy. So I will proxy green technology with renewable energy. So, we will analyze how that relationship works in a full sample of 45 countries and in different sample of 15 countries that represent different income groups. So here the data, as I said, we have 45 economies, and those 45 economies, we have 50 high income countries, 15 upper middle income countries, and 15 lower middle income countries. The period is 20 years. And as I said, the 45 economies selected in this study represent 90% of global GDP and 88% of CO2 emission. Most of the data used in this study are derived from the World Bank, and the data on sectoral carbon emission come from emission database for global atmospheric research, EDCARD. So how do I constitute the aggregate technology index? The index have 6 variables, and those 6 indicators are usually indicators of technology that are used in the literature. We have ICT, internet use per 100 people. We have the number of patents per 1,000 people, research and development expenditure as percentage of GDP. We have science and technology publication per 1,000 people. We have education, enrollment ratio in tertiary education, and then we have manufacturing value added as a percentage of GDP. So I'm using that, and I'm doing the principal component analysis, which constitutes of doing doing matrix and calculating the eigenvectors to have some index. And as I said, so those 6 variables will be used. And as you can see, this is the correlation matrix. You can see that those variables are very correlated among them. There is a high correlation between the different variables. And then this is the final result of the index, and the index shows for the 45 countries selected in this study, the United States is the first, then we have Australia, you have Korea Republic, Japan, Germany. So it's not very surprising that high-income countries come first technologically. And then this is the model. I'm using a dynamic panel model. And the dynamic panel model, we have sectoral carbon emission and emission from the previous period as well. And then we have urbanization, we have GDP, we have technology and financial development. And then I've added a GDP squared just to take into account the environmental constant curve and see if there is a presence of environmental constant curve on a sectoral basis.
Last 5 minutes, Mr. Milindi, thank you.
Yes. So the main equation will be divided into 5 empirical equations. We have the power sector, of course. As I said, we see each sector, how emission in each sector respond to technology. So you have the power sector, and then you have technology on the other side. So that technology will be replaced by the index that has been constituted in the study. And it will be replaced by the index. And then we have the manufacturing sector, the transport sector, the petrol sector. So those are the different emissions in the 5 sectors. So for methodology, I'm using this 2-step GMM model, which is appropriate for short-term period. And I'm using as well other method with fixed effects with robust standard errors, just to account for cross-sectional heterogeneity. And but in this presentation, I'm only presenting the 2-step GMM model results. And these are the results. The result shows that technology increase. I'll be talking about the results in different sectors. And yes, we'll go like that in different sectors. I'll take each sector in different samples. So we can see that we have the results in the full sample, the results in the high-income countries sample, the upper middle-income country sample, the lower middle-income country sample. So, and in the full sample, we can see that technology increases emission in the power sector. It's not really surprising that overall technology increase emission in the power sector, because more than 65% of energy comes from fossil fuels, and it doesn't really change over the past decade. And you can see that technology increases emission in the power sector, also in upper middle income countries and lower middle income countries. Those are countries that actually the share of energy, renewable energy, it's decreasing, and they are increasing their share of fossil fuel energy, since it's an energy that is easy to extract and accessible. So, and we can see that in the manufacturing sector, technology increases in the full sample, but interestingly, it decreases. Technology decreases emission, manufacturing sector emission in high-income countries. So we can say that in high-income countries, they're taking manufacturing sector, they're taking advantage of the energy mix there, and energy mix, and they're also very exposed to environmental regulation, and very exposed to environmental regulation, and there are some practices that are up to that bring energy efficiency. Just to see some procedures to change some of the companies, for instance, change the supply from coal or petrol to gas, because we know gas pollute less than the other one. So it's quite interesting to see that in the high-income countries, technology decrease carbon emission. And for the other results, we can see as well that the building sector technology decrease emission in the building sector in high-income countries, and it's because smart cities are built there, and then we also have energy efficiency in the installation, the building installation, and all the facilities and all that. And it's also quite, it's also investment in those in smart buildings, and definitely there is in the Internet of Things, and all the connected devices also play a role in reducing energy consumption in the building sector. So you can see that to go quickly final, the GDP, we have evidence of environmental cause-net curve in the power sector, in the manufacture sector, but we don't have, and in the building sector, but we don't have evidence of environmental cause-net curve, the GDP squared, in the transport and the petrol sector. And that is not really surprising, because the transport sector, it's a sector, electric cars just come to be produced, and they're still expensive. And even if income increases, it's not always the case that that will be straightforward.
In that time,
for even,
please conclude.
Yes, so this is what I was saying up above, the explanation. And for just green technology, we can see that renewable energy decreases emission in all sectors. So the concluding thought is just to say that in general, agri technology increases carbon emission in all sectors, except the manufacture sector and the building sector in high-income countries. But effort must be made to decarbonize technology. The effort are not enough, and effort must be accelerated. And we can actually, the private sector, since the private sector on most of the company in the manufacturing and building sector plays a critical role in energy transition, as you can see. And because of that, we can expect some technological transfer from the manufacturing sector and building sector to spread out to other sectors. So then those good practices can also help other sectors to reduce emission. And environmental regulation, everything, all this cannot be done if the environmental regulation it's not strong. It needs to be strengthened. So thank you everyone for.
Thank you very much, Mr. Melini. We will see at the end if we have some questions. I would like to go quickly to the third speaker of today's session, while he is possibly sharing his presentation, Mr. Paolo Bertoldi. He works at the European Commission. He is a senior expert in sustainable energy, climate change, energy efficiency, and is working at the Commission. He's been working since 20 years. Currently, he's in charge of policy analysis for energy efficiency. Mr. Bertoldi.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but my computer says that I cannot share till the other colleague stops sharing. So can the previous speaker?
Yes. Mr. Melindi, can you please stop sharing the screen so to allow?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a second.
Yeah.
Okay, now you should be able to see my presentation.
Yes, you have the floor, please.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to present you the evaluation of a climate program for cities called the Covenant of Mayors. So this is a global alliance of local governments, so mainly cities, that commit voluntarily to take action to combat climate change. It will increase the awareness by local policymakers on climate change, stimulate them to take action, and also work with the local business and citizens to achieve climate mitigation and adaptation. So a bit of history. This program was started a while ago in 2008 in European Union. It's called Covenant of Mayors. It had an initial target of 20%, minus 20% emission reduction in participating cities by 2020. In 2014, the adaptation pillar was added in a sense that the city had also to take action on adaptation climate change. So in this case, to reduce the impact of climate-induced hazard. In 2015, following the increase of the ambition in the EU, meaning that the greenhouse gas emission target was increased to minus 40% compared to 1990. This was also reflected in the Covenant of Mayors initiative, where there was a new target for 2030 set at minus 40%. And now we have observed activity the city should take, which is increasing energy access in developing countries and or reducing energy poverty in developing countries. This is a summary of the previous slide, but just say also that cities all around the world have a common reporting framework where they report their emissions, their effort in adaptation, and also the policy they adopt. And we are part of the European Commission. We are in charge of analyzing all the data submitted by cities, write regular report on this initiative, but also evaluate individual city plans called Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan, SICAP. And we produce a lot of reports and also guidebook for cities. So I'm going to focus now on a subset of the global participation, because there are two reporting platforms. One is called My Covenant, which is mainly used in European Union and countries around the European Union. So the Southern Mediterranean countries, the Eastern European countries, meaning from Ukraine to Caucasian countries. And this represents, in any case, the majority of cities participating in the global Covenant of Mayors. We have over 10,000 cities who sign up, representing more or less 328 million inhabitants. And you can see basically how the majority of them are located in the European Union, where the whole initiative started, and progressively expanded to other areas of the world. Not only this, but if you look at the European Union, the number of cities participating are mainly in Italy, Spain, Belgium, and less in other member states. This is because other member states had already national programs covering this, while most probably in Italy and Spain was seen as something new, not yet happening. So the cities were very enthusiastic to join this initiative. Also, they were expecting maybe possible financing support for implementing their plans from the European investment banks. So a great participation from Italy, at least on paper, not maybe follow on practice, as I will show you later on. So out of these 10,000 cities plus that sign up, only about 6,800 have submitted a real action plan. An action plan means a policy document which collects the main information related to emission in the urban context, so the greenhouse gas emissions in the various sectors, the energy consumption in various sectors, and also a plan how to reduce these emissions. And so you can see that only a number of cities had the plan, and adaptation, since was added at a later stage, there is only few, about 1,000 cities, which have also adaptation. So there's something new for cities. So most probably what is more urgent in cities, not only in Europe, but certainly also in the urban country, is the adaptation, because we see that natural hazards are hitting our cities with increased intensity and frequency. Cities are not aware, so they get flooding, forest fire, heat wave, and they should. The covenant is really pushing them to take action to mitigate these hazards, which have a great impact on the local economy, on the life of people, and in particular vulnerable people. Now, if you look at, as I say, this is a spread, basically a summary of the plans. They say about almost 7,000 plans, where the majority of them are in the European Union. The majority of plans are for, as I say, mitigation, with only 1,000 about adaptation. Not only this, but to add the credibility and the transparency of this initiative, we don't want city to sign up. We don't want city just to prepare a plan. So plan is always what you plan to do. So the intention, what we want to see are results. So every 2 years, the city have to report back on their reductions and implementation of their policies. So basically a new assessment of the emissions, and comparing these emissions, the greenhouse gas emission, with the emissions in the base year, so the first time when they did the plan. Majority of base year are set up around 2005 to 2010, and monitoring report, we get them from 2010 to 2017. Some cities have done several reports, some cities only one report. So it seems that when cities are then calling to action, they're a bit, not as so enthusiastic as in when they joined into such a program. And in fact, out of 6,800 cities which submitted a plan, only 2,600 have reported. So we have a good set of data, but not as many data as we would like to have. Sorry, yeah, this is the basically. If you look now again to the plan, we see that city go beyond the minimum requirement, which was minus 20% in year 2020 and minus 40% in year 2030, with an average of 26 in the first case and 44%. And the most ambitious cities are located in the European Union, also because these are richer countries with more possibility to implement technology solution, as was shown in the previous presentation. If we look at the mitigation action, that we have a database of 183,000 policy reported cities, so a very rich database that we try to assess and investigate. So we have basically in this slide the policy per sector, so municipal buildings, residential buildings, other non-residential buildings, transportation, industry, local electricity production, waste, etc. And then the colors or the percentage are by type of policy. So for example, when there is just an information policy, awareness raising, which is the one on the left-hand side, then you have energy certification, labeling of buildings, energy supply obligation, land use planning, road pricing, etc. I don't go through all of them, but by the way, we will publish very soon a full report, the 2021 assessment report of initiative, where all these data are analyzed and present. And now, if I look at the emission reduction achieved in 2020, based on the monitor report that we have, so it doesn't cover the full set of cities, but all the subset, the city have achieved an emission reduction of almost 24% in the period 2005 to 2020. And it's very interesting to note that the EU has the same 20% emission reduction. Of course, went beyond this one, but was based on base year 1990. So city had an accelerated decrease of emission compared to the European ones. I should also say that, of course, city benefited of national European policies, because if you have a national incentive for photovoltaics, city benefit of for the ratio of buildings, or the improvement of the vehicles emissions due to European regulation to reduce emissions in vehicles. Now, if you look at the 2030, we see that based on a simulation model we created with the data of the monitoring provided by the cities, we see a slowdown of emission reduction. So we project city to only achieve 36.5% compared to the 47. And in this case, I'm only plotting the European cities, which are the largest data set. So this means that the current measures already adopted and the current pace in emission reduction is not enough to reach the target. And therefore, cities have to accelerate, expand, take more action, and be more, more active in emission reductions. Now, very quickly, second part of my presentation, I would like to give you some information on the adaptation activity in cities. So we have only slightly less than 4,000 cities that representing only 37 of the total population of cities that participate in the initiative. And we have about 3,000, we have almost 1,000 adaptation plan. The adaptation plan has three components. First, an assessment of the risk of vulnerability. So which are the major hazards that the city faces now that will face in future by type of hazard, by the sector affected, and by who are the most vulnerable activities. Then the city should set some adaptation goal. In this case, there is no quantitative target you can set. It's not like emissions that you can measure and monitor. You can say, okay, we'll reduce them by 20 or 40%. So cities should set up their own goals. I want to reduce flooding. I want to avoid heat waves impact, or reduce forest fire that can come around my city and burn some buildings, for example. And then they have to take adaptation action to achieve this goal. So if we look at the most reported hazard, we see that floods and sea level rise is number one, followed by heavy precipitation, again, rain and storms. Wildfire is another important one, affecting mainly the southern European cities, Greece, Portugal, Italy. And then we have the extreme heat waves that are also present in Central Europe. And number five is the scarcity of water, so droughts induced by a very dry climate. Okay, then if you look at the impact of this hazard, we see that some will increase, most of them, I would say, apart from cold spell, will increase in intensity. So cities expect more severe and more frequent hazard, and we see year over year that this is really happening. More stronger rainfall leading to flooding, more heat wave hitting our cities, etc. Of course, in other parts of the world, even worse, because we also work with this program, for example, in cities located in the Caribbean island, and they have hurricanes, and which really are catastrophic event. Fortunately, in Europe, these events are already very important, very severe, but not as catastrophic as in other parts of the world. And then when we look at the sector impacted by this hazard, we see that agricultural forest is mainly the most affected sector. Of course, there is flooding with destroyed, in particular, crops, and also then, but also could be droughts that impact on agriculture. Then the buildings and the civil system, the environment and biodiversity. For example, forest fires kills wild animals that are populating our forest or fields around cities, health, building, etc. Then, if you look at the sector again by type of hazard, you can see again the impact in the different sectors of, for example, extreme heat or flood, and this, of course, the impact change. For example, the land use planning is very much impacted by flooding, and a lesson that cities should learn is any new urban development should not take place, for example, in flooding-prone zones, but avoid to build around rivers and or other places where there could be a hazard like a landslide or something similar.
Last 5 minutes, Mr. Bertoldi.
Yes, I finish in 3 minutes. Don't worry. Thank you, Chairman. Then if you look at the most impacted population by this hazard, we see that the elderly people are very vulnerable. In particular, they suffer very much heat waves. A low-income household, So there is a connection basically between income and exposure to climate hazard. Very often the vulnerable low-income household are maybe residing in buildings built in zones could be subject to landslide or flooding or forest fires, while the more wealthy people maybe have villas or nice house in the upper parts of the cities, which maybe are not reached by flooding. And so you can see that children is another category that is very much affected. For example, then also looking at gender of women and impact. So the action that city takes are, we have a database of 10,000 actions, so not as big as mitigation, but still a relevant data set to do some analysis, coming from about, let's say, 850 plans. Some action are covering both mitigation and adaptation, which is very good things, but because the two issues should be seen as an holistic problem in a city, that you have to reduce your emission because you want to contribute to the global reduction and thus to limit the temperature increase. But on the other side, you want also to take adaptation in your city to avoid the impact that is unavoidable. Even if we stop now emitting and we limit the temperature rise at 1.5 is still more than 1.0 that we have now. So whatever we do, we should expect more intense hazard hitting our cities. So the most reported action by city are action to mitigate the impact of extreme heat, droughts, and heavy precipitation. The most target sector are the water supply, the biodiversity and buildings, and the most target population group with this action are the children and the elderly. And a number of measures are basically already started. So there's not just plan, but there's real implementation actions. These are basically the number of action per sector, and also extreme heat is not the answer number one. We saw that was heavy precipitation. Majority of action are in this area because it's easy maybe to implement them. And you see again, elderly people might be dying during the heat waves in summer. So local authority would like to take action to avoid this. And this is by sectors. Most of the action take the water sector, water supply, and also management of rivers, and then other sector biodiversity, again, buildings, land use planning. And very quickly, I come to the conclusion. So this is a very important initiative which create awareness in local administration of the importance of climate change, knowing that everybody at each level of government, from international, at COP, the national, and then a local authority, have to take action. We cannot delegate to other level of governance. Second point is that the city are very close to their citizens, so they can mobilize them, and we know that citizen could be a big resource for transforming our society towards a green transition, which encompass reduction emission, but also other principles. The city have this instrument in the common domain, which is called the Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan, which allow them to plan both for mitigation and adaptation, and very soon also for energy poverty reduction or energy access, starting from collection of data, assessment of data, then setting targets, and then finally planning measures, adopting these measures, and measuring them. There is a big variety of solutions by local government, very often working with innovative approaches, and really with citizen participation is very important. There is a lot of synergy in actions, and no single solution is winning. So you should reduce emission in transportation, for example, to increase in public transportation, walking, cycling, and electric vehicles, but it's not enough. You have to work on buildings, on transportation, on introducing renewable generation in the municipal boundaries. All the plans are evaluated, We learn a lot. We give also interesting feedback to the cities, and we see over the years an improvement of the quality of the plans, the actions, and as I said, what is very important for this program that is regularly monitored and all the emission reduction are assessed and aggregated, and we see a real impact of this program on the total emission of the EU. Thank you very much for your attention. And as I said, very soon with the Joint Research Center, we release a report giving much more details on this one, together with the full data set of the plans of these 7,000 cities. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bertoldi. Please close the sharing of your screen. And now we go to the last speaker of the session. We hope that the connection is stable enough. I received some messages in this sense. I'm going to introduce Maria Pia Valentini. She works in the ENEA, the Italian Agency for New Technology, Energy and Economic Sustainable Development, in the Department for Energy Technology and Renewable Sources. I see the presentation on the screen, very good. Maria Pia is a transport engineer, and his field of action is mainly electric mobility, transport system modeling, environmental impact of mobility. Maria Pia, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiziano. So, my presentation is about the potentiality of decarbonization of public transport, road public transport, and it is focused on comparison among innovative vehicle technology. Starting from the target for decarbonization of road transport set by the European Green Deal, which set more ambitious CO2 standards for light vehicles. This is for help the growth of the number of zero or low emission vehicles, and another objective is a major rollout of a public charging and hydrogen refueling station, mainly for cars, vans, and trucks. And this is the roadmap from 2025 to 2050. So starting from 1 million up to 6.3 million of recharging station, electric recharging station. And the point is of reducing GHG transport intensity of 13% by 2030, and a more renewable H2 as synthetic fuels of 2.6% by 2030, and also more advanced fuels up to 2.2% by 2030. So as you can see, this target really do not involve public transport sector. This is because in fact the incidence of public transport in GHG emissions and energy consumption of the whole transport sector really is quite minimal, up to 40%, as you can see in the left image.
Excuse me, Maria Pia, excuse me. We don't see other slides other than the first one. Can you scroll down the slides, please?
Yeah, I already scrolled.
We have on the screen just the first slide with the title.
I'm sorry. I'm
But
scrolling.
okay, try to explain to as much as possible the content of the slide. Thank you.
Yes, I was showing an image where distribution of with the distribution of GHG emissions from transport sector, where it is shown that public transport incidence is quite minor, 4%. But in the other image, in the other figure, it is possible to see that public transport has a very high efficiency in transportation of passenger. That is for the Italian context, for 1 pax per kilometer, the consumption is only 20, where the consumption of for the same transportation unit of a car is more than 60. So almost a quarter than car consumption. That is the reason why the policies for greening transport sector point to have a higher modal share of buses and tram and metro than currently. This is why public transport is a very important focus, public transport, but also because, can you see me?
No, we still continue to see the first slide, but please go ahead. Oh, okay, now we see the new slide. Yes, it is the number 3. Likely you can scroll down. Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay. Public transport is also a perfect test bed for new technologies, because it is possible to create economies of scale into the public transport fleet locally, and also because it is possible to schedule transport operation more than for private mobility. That's taking account of these advantages. A lot of public transport operators are testing new technology, namely battery electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell buses. So far, in a lot of electric buses have been delivered in Europe, up to more than 5,000, and nearly 75 of them have been handed over in 2019 and 2020. And now, starting from China, also hydrogen fuel cell have starting to be tested at in real operation. So why battery electric buses and fuel cell electric buses? Because of course they are perfect for the urban context because they are zero emission at point of use. So there is a big need to reduce pollution in urban areas. So both battery and fuel cell buses are preferable from this point of view. But we have also to consider the economic aspects. First of all, the costs, possibly augmented cost for public transport operator. So we carried out a TCO, total cost of ownership analysis, to compare the economic features of both battery electric buses and fuel cell electric buses. And we considered the case of Rome, and we picked up a 222 weekday lines and examined all of them over a 12 years period, starting from 2019, with a 1% discount rate to evaluate the net present values of the technologies which are reported in the right tables. That is, three type of electric buses, A, B, and C, a fuel cell buses, and then also an hybrid vehicles, and for comparison, diesel and compressed natural gas buses. And these are on the right the input values for the analysis in terms of just investment and operational costs. So purchase cost of vehicles and maintenance cost of them, lifespan, and the dimension of the battery in terms of kilowatt hours per hours. For each of these type, we choose a type of battery for the battery electric buses according to the need of recharge of these three types of solution, battery solution. And so we consider also the investment and operation cost of recharging and refueling station. So, but let's let me explain what we intend with A, B, or C. A is a type of buses with a large battery up to 324 kilowatt per hour, which is intended to be recharged mainly at depot overnight. But in our case, we also assumed just additional recharge at midday with high power station. The B solution instead is recharged mainly at terminals with station of high power up to 250 kilowatt. And finally, the C solution is the one which is recharged at stop, at passenger stop, with the highest power of 600 kilowatt. Of course, the type of battery of storage change. So for the last one, we assumed ultra caps. For the B solution, a lithium titanato battery, and a lithium ferrophosphato battery for the A type. Of course, these different type of recharging solution affect also the operation of the buses and of course the operation costs. First of all, we analyzed the applicability of these three kind of battery electric buses to every line of the Rome network. And the results are shown in the upper left table, where results that 25% lines can receive at least one type of electric bus. 51.1% two type of electric buses type, and finally 18.1% all the three electric architecture. In sum, 94% of the lines in Rome can receive an electrification with one or more electric battery buses. Of course, this is now it's not an issue for fuel cell electric buses because they are applicable as much as conventional are, because they don't create problem with range or need of recharge during the day. From an economical point of view, the results are shown in the right graphs, where the average unit cost resulting for the all the technologies analyzed are shown. So we can see that on an average, battery electric bus of type A and B are competitive, really competitive with conventional ones. We intended diesel and compressed natural gas. On the contrary, the fuel cell and the C architectures are not competitive. These results comprises also the external costs, which are in orange at the top of the histograms. But we subdivide our results considering only internal cost and both internal and external costs. So if we consider only internal cost, the results are the ones shown in this figure on the left, bottom on the left.
Excuse me, Maria Pia, last 5 minutes. We need to close the session at 1:20 sharp. Thank you.
Yes, so we can see that summing A and B solution, at least 29% of line can be electrified with battery electric bus. They are convenient to electrify with battery electric bus. But if we consider also external cost, environmental cost, and I mean local pollution and climate change and noise, we consider these three kinds of impacts. The share of the battery electric bus increase a lot, becoming up to 60%. And up to 80%. Then we analyze the sensitivity to the energy price, assuming the rise of energy tariffs we are experimenting in this last year, in 2021. And in this case, due to the fact that the CNZ price are rise more than other energy fuels, the convenience of CNG buses disappear at all. Of course, the convenience of battery electric bus increases. So, of course, the environmental advantages of electric buses depends a lot on the kind of electricity production. In this case, we assumed an U-mix generation at 2016. And in this case, of course, battery electric buses demonstrate to reduce GHG emission respect to conventional one. Of course, it does, and this is not true in the case of hydrogen fuel cell, because so far mostly of hydrogen production is from steam reforming of natural gas. So it is a gray production, it's not a green production. But we will examine what will happen if we will change the pathways of energy production. These are data assumed from the more recent study of JSC Concawe on well-to-wheel analysis, and this transposes to urban basis. So we can see that changing energy pathways, we can also change energy cost and environmental cost.
Last minute conclusions, please.
Yes, yes. Conclusion is that this is in case of urban basis, the most convenient solution seems to be the battery electric buses than hydrogen fuel cell, because they, in case of gas reforming, if we assume a gas reforming from biomethane, a more convenient solution should be ICES compressed gas vehicles. When a green electricity is produced, the best solution seems to be the battery electric bus.
Thank you, Maria Pia. Sorry, the time has ended. I'm sorry to push the panelists because of time, but the Secretariat was clear. We need to close the session at 1:20, which is exactly now. I would like to thank all the panelists for their presentations and refer to the Secretariat for making your presentations available somewhere in the convention website. Thank you very much to all. I give the floor to the Secretariat for the closure of the session. Secretariat. Secretariat does not respond, but okay, in any case, we close here. Yes?
That's it?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay.
We close the session here, okay?
If you want, yes. If somebody want to make any question.
I don't see questions in the window, not even in the chat.
Okay. I can close your.
I have a question for the last presentation. Hello? Can I ask a question to the last presenter?
Sure,
to
sure.
Mrs. Valentini. Have you also considered to use hydrogen in internal combustion engine in buses? So basically replace traditional diesel with other natural gas or natural gas with hydrogen?
No, really, we don't consider this this possibility because in general, internal combustion engines are less efficient than electrical one. So in general, hydrogen is assumed to be used in fuel cell solution.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer, Maria Pia. Secretariat.
Okay, so if all the speakers are terminated, if you want to, we can close the session. It's okay for you?
Yes, can you please tell us if the presentations will be available somewhere?
Sure.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.